Okay. Sit, sit, sit.
Support your kids' growth every day. Support your kids' growth every day.
for those people on the freeways or on the tube, stressed out, there's a resource available to you. And if you're listening to your earbuds with your phone, there's so many free apps that'll help you set the cadence.
Yeah.
It's such an easy way and a smart way to get closer to the flow state, turn down the anxiety. And I'll give you one last example. You're saying, okay, I believe him, I don't believe him, okay. Take you to a gnarly story again. There's this rare, the perturbation of the system is what sometimes reveals the mechanics, So there's a disease called moya moya. The Japanese people get it more than the rest of the world. Nobody knows why. I had a patient, a kid, and basically you have these 4 arteries popping off your heart going into your brain. And sometimes right when they pop through the skull, rather than breaking into this beautiful tree of small blood vessels, they get clogged at a young age. And these kids develop this fine blood vessels, this vasculature that's very sensitive to breathing. And when we have surgery that needs to be done on those patients, we have to tell the anesthesiologist at the end, don't let this kid cry. Because if they cry and hyperventilate and breathe too fast, the signals will be sent to the fine blood vessels to shrink. Hyperventilation, skittish breathing, is a squeezer of blood vessels that can clot off the work of our surgery in kids. This is approved. This has been 20 years. Don't let kids cry after moya moya repair at a children's hospital. All the neurosurgeons can talk about it. So there's biology to slow breathing working through the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And then there's also biology to rapid breathing and hyperventilating being not good for the brain in certain conditions. So there is basis to breath controlling mind.
Yeah, incredible. I'm going to move to practical tips for us, what we can do in our lives as adults to help improve our brain health. But before we go there, when kids are coming up a lot, yes, that example you just gave, I've had the pleasure of meeting your 14-year-old son, who's lovely, really, it's just incredible to say hi. And for me, actually, it's really nice to see you traveling with him on a PR tour. And it makes me think, it's something I've thought about for years. I'd love to take my kids with me, but often we think, actually, no, it's better for me just to go and do my work and then come back. But actually just seeing and hearing you say how rewarding that experience is for you and your son, it makes me think about reevaluating how I do these things. So thank you for that. But I want to go deep into kids here. So you, at the start of your book, I think, it was interesting to me how your knowledge as a neurosurgeon has in some ways shaped what you do with your children. And it's really to do with that attitude to risk. Some of the things that we might perceive as risky, you allow them to do. I think it was climbing in trees, for example. But some of the other things that others might allow them to do, like crossing a road, you're pretty strict on. I wonder if you could elaborate.
Yeah, so first of all, my wife unexpectedly got pregnant. Now, I say unexpectedly because she was an OBGYN in training and I was a neurosurgeon in training, and she's like, I'm pregnant. I said, well, that was 100% your jurisdiction. I thought you had that under control. So we had kids when we were in training, back when those hours were 40-hour shifts. So it was nuts back then, right?
Wow.
When she was, and my siblings and her siblings, we're not the oldest, but we had kids first. And there was like a generation gap where I hadn't seen kids being raised for a while. And so she and I just kind of made up our own stuff. She's so we brought in a lot of what I call diversity of interactions, partly by necessity, partly by choice. We put them in a lot of different schools. We put them in a lot of different faith-based schools, secular schools. We took them to a lot of different places. They ate a lot of different food, a lot of different music, grandparents, nannies. We did all those things. And part of what motivated me is when I had my kids when I was also in the children's hospital. And I remember reading the study, and people were suggesting, and I think later on an orphanage in Belarus proved it. Such a sad case, but an illustrative one. So I always like to tell you my story, and it can be sometimes too intense and maybe even a bit macabre, but that lets you know, like, why would we ask this guy about kids? Well, first, I got 3 teenage kids. I do children's brain surgery around the world. Usually in Eastern Europe and South America. But the kids in an orphanage that were left alone and not tended to, the beautiful undulating pattern of that brain, which is like the reason it's like that is like, imagine taking a giant pizza and squeezing it like an accordion to put it into a box. It gives you more canopy
square footage or square
Yeah.
kilometers, if you will. And what happened was they started losing the ridge because
Wow.
they needed less parts of their brain. The brain is an energy hog. If you don't use it, it's 3 pounds, and it uses 20% of the blood flow. 20% goes to that thing in our skulls. So it's not advantageous to feed parts of the brain that you're not actually using. It'll start to wither. And
Hence, you'll use it or lose it.
yeah, but in a way that's an active process at the structural physical level. Parenting in a way that would preserve the flesh inside my children's skulls was important to me. And then at a microscopic level, I was getting my PhD then, and we were seeing this thing called synaptic pruning. So in some ways, the biology of the brain is very landscape architecture. We use words like pruning and dendrites. And you are born with more brain cells, all of us, than you're intended to keep.
Right.
And the ones you keep as a toddler, when you're young, are the ones that were tickled, that were engaged. And we know that again because if somebody's born with an eye that doesn't work, that part of the brain starts with brain cells, but if it's not using it, it'll let those things wither. So my parental approach, and I don't know if it's working or not. It's not even about the outcome. I took the best approach I could.
Yeah.
I just took them to all different stretches of experiences. I had them doing, free running for one summer. They dabble with some music. We've traveled all over the world for pleasure, languages, food, constant interaction. And for example, what better thing for my 14-year-old son to come here and find himself having the confidence and the ability to navigate London coming from Los Angeles. That's my gift to him. As a father, I'll let school do the algebra and the geometry and the grammar. I actually don't do homework with them. It's kind of a weird thing. I'd rather just chat with them like we're talking. I'll pull an interesting article and I'll be like, let's talk about this. I just want to hear how you think.
Yeah.
Just keep up with me, talk to me, teach me.
It's interesting. Loads of new ideas there. What about the orphanage you mentioned? What was going on there? So why were their brains, adapting in the way that they were?
Yeah.
Was it a lack of touch? Was it
all of it. It's funny, lack of touch. The 40 hours when I was doing those shifts, I missed my kids. That's for a few. And they were telling us not to have the kids in their bed. And I'm not trying to come up with policy or give advice on the show. My wife and I, 2 medics at that time, 2 surgeons in training, we put the kid between us because of touch. I wanted to have them near me. I wanted them to hear me breathe. I wanted those things. And the lack of touch will shut down certain parts of your brain. The lack of sight, visual stimulation will shut down parts of your brain. And here's the thing that just really broke my heart. The introduction of a stressful environment will change the brain forever, right? If you have to fend off assault, if you have to worry about getting home safely, that's too much to put on that brain. Because now what you're doing is you're messing with the emotional thermostat, that subcortical structure. You're going to make it harder for that kid to find that flow state in their life as they mature because you prime them to always be under threat. And that survival instinct that lets them survive also gets in the way of happiness and tranquility. And I think, I'm not a policy person, but that's why you need to put a lot of resources into kids. Because if you don't set that thermostat right, they're not going to be healthy adults. And you're going to be paying on the back end for people who are thinking about it from a financial point of view.
Yeah, and then that's super fascinating. And I think, those early years are critically important. We know that as a note of optimism for people listening who might be thinking, as many parents do, maybe the first few years were very stressful and there were certain situations out of their control. Often you can feel very bad as a parent.
Responsible,
think,
guilty.
What can I do now? But we are going to come to these tips, and there's things that we can always do to improve our brain function.
Yeah.
And I do want to make sure we cover those. You mentioned, 2 things about your children, about your son in particular, really. First one is, why were you so cautious? This is what I got from reading your book about letting your children cross the road, yet you're happy them jumping on trees. Okay, first question. And the second question is, you said that your son here in London, what a great gift that he can now start to navigate his way around London. And I was thinking about navigation, I was thinking about GPS, smartphones. Is there an unexpected consequence to our brains by outsourcing its ability to think? Many of us, we don't know where we're driving anymore. Our GPS takes us. And if the GPS breaks down, we don't know where we are. We don't know how to get back. So quite a few questions there. If you could tease your way through them.
Yeah, no, I worked at a children's hospital and I saw how kids die. So apologies to the audience. This is just who I am. I always learn from things and I have intense experiences. But we saw kids choke. They fell out of second-story windows. They were burned. And they got hit by cars, all these ridiculous SUVs, giant vehicles, and fast roads. And so when they were younger, I wanted them to be safe. Because pediatric mortality, frankly, is, that's the first thing you want to avoid. So that's why I didn't mind if they fell out of a tree. And they've taken some scrapes. The one that's here now has got a scar from his forehead. He rode his bike into a garage. Because I saw from Children's Hospital, that's stuff to heal from. And so that's why I didn't, at that time, want them to be crossing streets and stuff like that in the neighborhood.
Because you're looking at death, not an injury.
First, you got to get them to live. You got to feed them and get them to live. And then you can do all those things we talked about by diversifying. And what are we robbing our kids from by letting them push the navigation up. So that's interesting. It's okay, in my opinion. I don't want them to be memorizers. It's okay for them to have all the capitals of the American states that we used to have to memorize in their pocket. I'm like, I don't care. You get a good grade on that. That's not really what I'm not trying to grow robots. So that kind of memory and loss of capacity, I'm kind of okay with. But there's another type of memory called working memory, where they can juggle a lot of things. I got to get to school. I got this text. Multitasking. That's really a skill. That's what we all want to do better in a calm fashion, right?
Well, there's some neuroscientists will say that it's impossible to multitask. I've read that from many neuroscientists. There's a book. I don't know if it's the Organized Mind where it
I've
says
seen
it,
that.
but
And I just completely disagree. The highly functional people I know, my kids, they can do a lot of different things. Not necessarily 8 projects on the kitchen table at the same time, but I mean multitask 8 different things that need to get done during the day without dropping the ball and connecting them in a seamless fashion. I think that's called working memory. I think that's important. The particular
so
thing
we're talking about different things.
Yeah. So exactly. So just raw memorization of phone books. I don't mind if they lose that. Able to get through the day and not drop the ball and know what comes first, what comes second, priorities. As you know, when the acutes came in, you had to take care of the triaging is working memory. And then, but the navigation one I'm particularly opinionated about. I don't like them to press the route app. And you say, well, where does that come from? Is he making that stuff up, or where does he get that? The temporal lobe actually has grid cells, GRID. Neuroscientists have found that there are cells in particular clusters of tissue in the temporal lobe that help you with spatial navigation. And so what I tell my kids is, come on, you got to be good at this, because this spatial navigation is that cognitive reserve that you build now, is what people lose in dementia when people have Alzheimer's. They can't find their way home. It's in that same space. So building up spatial navigation is good for you now. It's good for when you're older. It's good when you're a surgeon. It's good if you're driving. And those grid cells are important to cultivate. So what we do, and many people do it their own way, but for my sons, if we're going somewhere in Los Angeles or even around the world, let's just look at the map. You can press route if you want, but then you got to put it away. 101 south, 10 east, exit this, make a left. So I want them to think about the sequence of navigating an environment. And if you think about it, it was probably useful thousands of years ago in the savannah, like which cave, which rock. That's a very important skill to have, and it's deeply rooted in neuroscience and biology in our brain.
I love it. It reminds me a little bit. And I've got to be honest, my tendency is to go a bit extreme on things sometimes when I apply them to myself. I'm really kind and compassionate, I hope, to my patients, and a lot more relaxed. With myself, I can be quite tough sometimes. And when I used to do a lot of house visits, or house calls, I think you guys call them, from general practice, I remember my car did not have a sat-nav at that time. Still doesn't, actually. And I was quite resistant to using them. So what I would do is, when I knew I've got to go and visit these 3 patients, I'd write down their address. I'd look on Google Maps as to roughly where they were in relation to the surgery where I was working. I sort of,
hold on to that.
I'd lock it into my head, and then I'd go to my car and sort of try and picturise it and go, let me see if I can figure it out and get there. And I guess what I didn't realise I was doing is that I was working out these grid cells, which I feel pretty good about myself now that I was doing it. But no, it's interesting, isn't it? That
all my suggestions, I want there to be a scientific basis.
Yeah.
Not that other suggestions aren't great.
No.
But I'm not here to give you suggestions that I can't back up with hardcore science or clinical stories. And grid cells do exist. They're in hardcore neuroscience journals.
Yeah.
And it explains why preserving navigation and thinking about that. So people want to do puzzles. People should be thirsty for challenge. I think holding on as navigation in a 3-dimensional environment is very important.
I want to move now to practical tips,
Sure.
because this podcast is called Feel Better, Live More. The reason it is, it's quite self-explanatory, but I believe that when we feel better in ourselves, when we're functioning better, we get more out of our lives. We've got more energy to do the things we want to do. We've got more cognitive capacity to do the things that we like to do in our spare time and even at work.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of tips in the book. I want to I won't say quick fire, but just go through them systematically. I was really struck by a paragraph I read that I think it was in your book, about how even at 60 or 70 years old, a few simple lifestyle changes with patients or with the public has been shown to increase their performance on cognitive tests. And I think that's really empowering for people when they think, oh, well, I didn't do this, I've had a stressful life. Yeah. Wait a minute, there are still things you can do. So let's go through what are some of the things that people can do, whether it's their diet, whether it's, whatever. You go through some of the tips that you think are useful.
And I thought about how to explain that so it's not too much of a listicle for people. Let's do a 24-hour day about, I'm just thinking about this now. I'm just going to take you through things you can do. If you have the luxury, so first of all, food. I mean, people are starving in this world, and food scarcity, bad food. I'm respectful of that. That said, if you wake up, consider skipping breakfast a couple of times a week. In neuroscience journals, and from what we know about the biology of it, that intermittent fasting, going 16 hours a couple of times a week without eating glucose, your liver will run out of its glucose reserves. It will burn fat into these things called ketones. The brain is a hybrid vehicle. It's not all gas. It's not all electric. It likes both. And so if you have dinner at 8 and it's Monday evening, consider having your next meal be midday the next day. That's an easy way to get to 16 hours. It doesn't mean you're fasting for days and days. There is neuroscientific literature that intermittent fasting is good for attention and focus. Okay, now it's lunchtime, and you're thinking about what to eat. Before that, I would consider taking 5 minutes to just breathe deeply like you're doing now. Just make deep breaths a couple of times a day, 3 times a day for 3 minutes. Make it easy. See how that works for you. Just the pause might be helpful. Now it's time to eat. The food you choose is important. And there's delicious food to eat that's actually good for your brain. And how do I know that? Well, we don't have a pill for Alzheimer's, but we do have the Mind diet, which is essentially Mediterranean food. That if you look at a group of thousands of people over a long period of time, they had less dementia. So now that you figured out the cadence of eating, which is intermittent fasting, skipping breakfast a couple of days a week, now that you've brought in pre-lunch 3 minutes of just deep breathing, that's meditative breathing, choose plants, choose nuts, choose occasional fatty fish. The fatty fish has omega-3s, which is an essential component of your brain. It's the wrapping around all those connections that keeps those electrical signals firing faster.
And on that point, given the growing tendency to follow a vegan diet, in your opinion, can that be problematic?
Yeah. I don't think so. This is a good question. I was asked this at Stella McCartney's yesterday, and there are good nutritional sources for B vitamins as well as omega-3s. I don't have the names of those jars.
They can supplement. If they're choosing to go vegan, you recommend they supplement with something containing omega-3 and
B vitamins. But if they supplement omega-3s from fish oil, then they're not vegan anymore. But there are other supplements. And what I also say is the benefits of being vegan, if you can pull it off, are so great that a little bit less omega-3s because you're not eating fish, I think it far exceeds that.
Are you saying that relative to the standard, of course you live in America, so the standard American or the standard Western diet, relative to that, are you suggesting increasing plant foods is generally a good thing?
Absolutely. Not only is it good for the animals that you're not killing, it's good for the planet, but it's actually what your body prefers. It's healthier for you. And if you want to eat meat, consider the Mediterranean diet where it's fatty fish and poultry. Pass on the beef, pass on the fried food, pass on the processed food. Now, if you do have a burger, you're not going to undo what you did. Just make those things an indulgence rather than a habit. So now you're at lunchtime, you've chosen the Mediterranean diet, more plants, less meat, the right kind of meat, and your day goes on. And then the question is, what's next to improve your health? A bit of exercise is great. The brain likes exercise because it is flesh. Don't clog the plumbing to your garden because swaths of your garden will wither. So people have strokes and injuries. It's because blood flow is not getting into their brain. That's the way to hurt the structure of your brain. So what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Then the other thing it does is it bathes itself in these neurotrophic factors. That's what my science is on, BDNF, brain drivers. And so that's what my grants are on. When the brain exercises, it showers itself. It's not like thigh muscles release healthy brain chemicals that swim up there. It's got its own pharmacy. You give it the right behavior and interaction, it'll reward itself. So exercise keeps the plumbing open to the flesh of the brain, as well as releases molecules that serve as miracle grow for the brain. A couple times a week is a good place to start.
Do we know what specific exercise is good for the brain and good for BDNF levels, or is it a mix?
We don't. Well, some people are starting to suggest some strength training is an essential component. So if you're just running a marathon, you might want to throw in some light weights. But a little bit more exercise than you're currently doing is what the brain's going to say, hey, I like this direction. I'm going to shower myself with BDNF.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we can, look, strength training, I'm a huge fan of strength training. I do think we undervalue muscle mass in society and in health. But generally speaking, for most of us, if we just increase how much we move.
Get vertical even.
Yeah.
Get out of the chair.
That's going to help.
Just the postural elements of standing is a first step. Next thing you know, you're walking. Next thing you know, you're taking the stairs. So these are simple things. These are free things. And so exercise, and then the day moves on, and you're getting to the evening. If you can, I like to read something completely unfamiliar. I've got a stack of old magazines and just flip through, just new content for your mind. And I think since it's thinking flesh, and of course it likes blood, it likes to be irrigated. Of course it likes a certain kind of diet because of the components it needs, but it also wants to think. If you ask Usain Bolt, how do you get your thigh muscles stronger? So take some stairs. Well, how do you get your brain to be healthier? Think. And everybody's next level of thought and challenge is individual. We don't all have to do the same puzzles. We don't all have to have the same career, but get out of your comfort zone, if you will, just with the thoughts. So flip through something different on your phone, read something different on your phone, develop a new habit. I think that's important. And then for those of us who have creativity as an ambition, and I have the luxury of having creativity as an ambition, because cutting out a cancer from somebody's brain is a three-dimensional thing. Trying to guess what how Mother Nature is working in science is a creative thing. I'm not a technician. I'm not an intellectual, frankly, in the end. I'm an instinctive person who wants to harness his creativity. So, people are microdosing, people are doing different things, but that requires pharmacological intervention. I don't support that. What I would say is we're all wildly creative in our dreams. And people are finding that when you, on the transition from awake to asleep, and from sleep to waking up, it's called hypnagogic and hypnopompic. There's actually those same alpha waves that we've been talking about, just for 10, 20 minutes as you drift into sleep and your tasks are done. And Salvador Dali mentioned that. He uses sleep as a psychedelic tool for creativity to solve problems. It's not going to happen every time, but I like to look at my riddles at the end of the night, and I have a notes app. I write a few things and I wake up and I write a few things. That transition is like sort of a strange portal to your subconscious. And again, based on science, if you put some electrodes on a brain, at that time, you have those alpha waves that we talk. Individual. We don't all have to do the same puzzles. We don't all have to have the same career, but get out of your comfort zone, if you will, just with the thoughts. So flip through something different on your phone, read something different on your phone, develop a new habit. I think that's important. And then for those of us who have creativity as an ambition, and I have the luxury of having creativity as an ambition, because cutting out a cancer from somebody's brain is a three-dimensional thing. Trying to guess what how Mother Nature is working in science is a creative thing. I'm not a technician. I'm not an intellectual, frankly. In the end, I'm an instinctive person who wants to harness his creativity. So, people are microdosing, people are doing different things, but that requires pharmacological intervention. I don't support that. What I would say is, we're all wildly creative in our dreams, and people are finding that when you on the transition from awake to asleep, and from sleep to waking up. It's called hypnagogic and hypnopompic. There's actually those same alpha waves that we've been talking about just for 10, 20 minutes as you drift into sleep and your tasks are done. And Salvador Dali mentioned that. Like, he uses sleep as a psychedelic tool for creativity to solve problems. It's not going to happen every time, but I like to look at my riddles at the end of the night and I have a notes app. I write a few things and I wake up and I write a few things. That transition is like sort of a strange portal to your subconscious. And again, based on science, if you put some electrodes on a brain, at that time, you have those alpha waves that we talked about, awake, but focused and calm. And you also have these other waves, these delta waves, waves that are light sleeping, early dreaming. It's the only time where you have both awake and asleep waves.
And I've heard in one of your articles, I've read in one of your articles that you say, leave a pen next to your bed so that you can actually take advantage when those creative thoughts come just before bed or just when you wake up. You can actually just jot them down. That's incredible. You said learn new things.
Yeah.
How important can learning a new language be?
Oh, it's an essential thing, and whether you get it right is actually secondary. It's the process of trying to learn. So language, music, the act of learning makes your brain say, I gotta pull from different pathways. I gotta get to different corners of my mind. Actually an energy consuming activity, and that's what engages the greatest corners and recesses of your mind, is to learn new things, particularly music, particularly languages, social interactions. We know these things, and now I'm just trying to give you a biological basis that brain's efficient if it wants to fall into its rut. And breaking the rut in a constructive way is going to be good for your brain globally, as your mind, thoughts and emotions, as well as the flesh. That's one strong way to stave off dementia.
Yeah, and that's very powerful. You're keeping your brain active, trying new things. And I think what you said was super empowering. It's not about whether you can actually master that language. It's not about whether you master playing the piano. Just the process of trying to, that's going to do all the groundwork and all the sort of heavy lifting in the brain, which is super empowering. Doing things with your non-dominant hand. I'm asking, A, because I'm interested, but B, it's something that I often do with my son. Like, we've been playing table tennis. You call it table tennis in America? Or ping pong?
Both.
We've been playing that in the back garden, and sometimes we'll try and play with our left hands, we're both right-handed, and Daddy says to him, hey, this is really good for your brain, try and do it with your left hands. What's going on there, and is it good for your brain?
Yeah, it is. I'm a two-handed surgeon. Neurosurgery requires the use of left and right. So to facilitate that, I had a mentor when I was younger say, put your right arm in a sling for a little bit, just to be crazy, just to see how that goes. And over a few weeks, it's awkward, but your left hand, if it's your non-dominant hand, it can catch up quite a bit. And that effort to learn how to use parts of your body that you weren't relying upon is what I learned about from my patients. When they have injuries, when they come in with stroke, or they've had a brain tumor removed, sometimes they have weakness in their arms and legs and their ability to speak. They have these central nervous system issues, and they have to rely on what's left. And that is a very powerful thing, because when they come back to clinic 3 weeks later, or you see them 3 months later, they're quite facile. And that is brain plasticity. That is brain rehab. Relying on extremities, relying on thought, relying on communication that you wouldn't have originally had. So when I use my mouse with my left hand, I force myself to do that, or chopsticks, and I encourage my kids to do that, what it's doing is the left hand, for me that's non-dominant, is controlled by the right side of the brain. That part of the brain, if you don't engage it, will also start to wither a little bit.
Yeah.
And so before you get into those habits, and again, nobody's saying if you're going to throw the football for a championship game to use your non-dominant hand, but the recruitment of brain cells in your right hemisphere by using your left hand and your left arm to bring in habits, I think is a powerful and effective way. Not only does it bring those brain cells in, just think about it at the musculoskeletal level. If using your phone your whole life with your right hand, you're going to stave off arthritis by bringing in the other hand as well. So it's good for your brain. It's good for your joints. It's a way to be a more balanced person physically. And music, again, it's a two-handed sport, brings that in nicely.
Yeah, incredible. Rahul, look, just to finish this off then, I know we've gone through tips, but I'm going to push you a little bit here.
Sure.
I always like to leave the listener with some really actionable, practical tips that they can apply in their own lives immediately to improve the way that they feel or improve the way that their brain functions. So what are your top 4 tips
Sure.
for people listening to this that they can think about applying to their own life?
One would be get vertical. That's the most essential thing. When I see our patients who can come out of the bed and stand, they grow. You can see a withering flower come back to life if they can get vertical. Standing and moving is very important for you. Wherever you're at, just do a little bit more. 2, make subtle but important changes in your diet. Get rid of the red meat and fried food. Add in some more of the Mediterranean diet. You're still going to enjoy what you're eating. You can have a glass of wine, salmon, red wine, yogurt, fruit. It's not a tough thing. It's just changing the direction of what you're eating. The other things I would do is I would consider getting some of these apps. Now, it's an interesting place to start. I don't know which ones I'm recommending, but there are brain training apps.
Yeah.
Brain training works. Certain governmental agencies are using it. We use brain training as brain rehab in our patients. Find some puzzles, find some content, read a book, do something unusual. That will also be good. And the fourth one I would say is, try to find happiness. It's the most elusive thing. But we also know that people who have mental health issues or people who are depressed, their brains start to change. They are brain injured from the way they are thinking. So if it's within your power to be happier, to pursue relationships and crafts that make you happy, that will probably be the best thing for your brain.
Trading contract for differences can be a complex process, but here are 3 simple steps on how you can start trading IG's latest CFD product, Knockouts. First,
you mentioned balance between thoughts and emotions. And I think that's a really interesting concept to unpack a little bit. I've heard in a previous conversation that you've had that you said that depression, anxiety, OCD, and overeating all come from a similar part of the brain. And that, again, with these conditions, there can be a problem with this balance. So I wonder if you could explain some of that, please.
Yeah, so this is it's going to take a little while for me to set up, but if
you've got time.
Okay, but it's very important to me that we've lost the nuance in our understanding. So let's just take a few simple examples. Inflammation is bad. Is it? I don't know. Certain types of inflammation are bad, yes. If you are constantly stressed out and that's also generating an inflammatory response, that's horrible for you. Certain types of inflammation are necessary. But now let's get deeper with emotions and feelings and anxiety and these sort of things, right? There's a certain amount of anxiety that is appropriate. You should have situational anxiety. That's by design. That's protective. But when